What's up, Dragon Brood? With the release of Secrets of Strixhaven, we have more cards to talk about because this set is full of just random interesting cards. But today, we're going to talk about one of the most interesting of the cards in the set, and that's Applied Geometry. Mostly because this card can be used a bunch of different ways. Now, if you don't know what it is, it's a 4-mana spell, so it's 2 green blue for a sorcery. But you can create a token that's a copy of target non-aura permanent you control, except it's a 0/0 fractal creature token in addition to its other types, but you also put 6 counters on it. Now, this means that this can counter or actually copy almost anything, really. And that opens up a lot of ideas of what you can do with this. So we're going to kind of talk about this in 3 levels, right? The kind of basic ideas, then the next level, and then we're going to get kind of crazy with this card and finish with the biggest thing you can possibly do with this. So starting at level 1, we can copy creatures, right? And I think that's kind of the easiest way to go. Now, there are cards like Ouroboros that are a 4-mana, 1/3 that puts counters on itself every turn equal to its power, but also juices up the rest of your team. So you can almost play this as Ouroboros 5, 6, and 7 in your deck if you wanted to, maybe all the way to 8 if you wanted to play a full copy of both. So if you're already playing a deck that's full of +1/+1 counters or things that add counters, this lets your Applied Geometry just be an extra copy of all those other good cards you're already playing, and that makes a lot of sense to go with. But if you have back-to-back Ouroboros, well, we've already seen that that's very popular and very strong, so now you have a chance to have that happen with, well, just more frequency, really. But there's also a forgotten card from Foundations called Predator Ooze. It's 3 green mana for a 1/1 that has Indestructible. And whenever it attacks, you put a counter on it, and then whenever something dies that it's dealt damage to, you get a +1/+1 counter. Now, this is good because you don't just waste your Applied Geometry, right? You copy something that is indestructible, making it very hard to remove this creature. Now, don't get me wrong, you can still have it exiled or anything like that, but your opponent has to work a little bit harder to get rid of this token. So this is a really good thing to copy because it basically puts your opponent in a blender where they have to block every turn or they're just taking progressively more damage. But what if we just want to get more mana? Well, there's an option in Goldvein Hydra. Now, this is a card people have forgotten about, but it's X and a green, and it has Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, which is already fantastic. And then it comes in with X +1/+1 counters on it. And whenever it dies, you get that many treasure. Now, granted, they're tapped, so you can't use them immediately, but that's neither here nor there. The fact that you can actually use Applied Geometry to copy this means that you've already, say, maybe you played it the turn before and it's got 3 counters on it, right? You play your Applied Geometry. Now, to be fair, you don't get those other counters because you're copying the creature itself, not the counters that are on it. However, Applied Geometry lets the token come in with 6 counters already. So now if your Applied Geometry dies, you get 6 extra mana back. You actually gain mana by playing a 4-mana spell. That can't hurt, really. And there's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of decks that actually want those tokens or even particularly want treasure. So this could be something to consider for some very fun, brewish builds, if you will. But maybe you want something more than +1/+1 counters, right? So we have Market Backwalkers. This is another card that people have forgotten about from Aetherdrift, but it is XX in the cost, which means you could play it for even just 2 mana to get it as a 1/1. All you really need is for it to be on the battlefield so that you can copy it with your Applied Geometry. Once you do, you now have a 6/6 that has the ability to put more counters on itself. And even better is that when it dies, you draw cards for each +1/+1 counter on it. So now if your opponent kills it, you get 6 cards, right? This is actually really good value overall. And your opponent already wants to deal with your Market Backwalker, and now you have an even bigger one. So if you are playing a deck that's able to just take care of all these +1/+1 counters and move things around, not only do you potentially get counters, but you also get cards. So let's end level 1 going a little bit crazy. Let's say you want to play a 3-fold Thunderhulk. Now, while this does cost 7, we do know that pretty much anybody who's ever played this card has found some creative way to get it onto the battlefield. Now, it does enter with 3 +1/+1 counters on it, and when it enters or attacks, you create the number of +1/1 gnomes equal to the number of counters on it, or more accurately, equal to its power. And then you can pay to sacrifice another artifact to put a counter on this card. Now, put this in terms of Applied Geometry, right? We get to copy this. We'll enter with 3 extra counters because, well, 3-fold Thunderhulk lets you come in with 3 counters. So now you have a 9/9 Applied Geometry. Technically, it's a copy of the Thunderhulk. But when you go to attack, now you get to make that many 1/1s as well. And then at any point you need to sacrifice artifacts, you could grow your fractal token that you've made from the applied geometry. So lots of crazy stuff going on back and forth, and these cards can kind of help each other out in some ways by creating more things you can sacrifice for the other one. Okay, now that brings us to level 2. We've talked a lot about creatures we can copy, but let's talk about non-creatures we can copy, because remember, we can copy anything that's pretty much not an aura. Now, you can copy lands, and we're not going to really cover that because I think we all know what we can do with the lands, though copying a creature land is actually pretty funny because then you actually are already attacking with a creature that's activated, so you don't have to spend the activation cost, so that's fun. But let's talk about some other things, particularly stuff like Earthbender Ascension. Now, this is kind of simplistic, but you would actually get to search for another land, and it means you're able to get to those extra +1/+1 counters and ramping just a little bit faster and able to give trample to more stuff, which isn't nothing when you're making a 6/6 that's also going to be getting more counters a lot sooner. But you might also want something that just gives extra value on its own. Well, what if we just copied Innkeeper's talent, right? Getting to put a +1/+1 counter on every turn, then giving your stuff more ward costs to make it harder to remove your creatures. That's a lot of easy value, honestly. I think this is a card that would already be played in other decks that have +1/+1 counters, and this would work right along with that. So if for whatever reason, maybe your board got swept and your creatures are gone. Well, now because you have this permanent on the battlefield, you go ahead and copy it. Not only do you have a 6/6, when you go to the combat step for that turn, you'll be getting 2 extra counters. So yeah, kind of just silliness all around that you can do with this applied geometry, and it only gets sillier from here. Which, speaking of, that brings us to Terra Symbiosis. This is actually a pretty sweet card that's 3 mana, and whenever you put 1 or more counters on something, you get to draw that many cards, but it only happens once a turn. Well, here's a really fun thing, though. If you play an applied geometry and copy your Terra Symbiosis, you enter with 6 counters. That means you get 6 cards. But, hold up for a second. The card you just copied is also a Terra Symbiosis. So you get 6 more cards. That means for 4 mana, you get a 6/6 and 12 cards. Yeah, this applied geometry is just crazy. But maybe you're in a pinch and you just got to get something off the battlefield. Well, you can just copy a Hunter's Talent and then use the 6/6 you made to take out one of your opponent's creatures. And then you can also level them up and get extra attacking and trampling for all your stuff, which is actually really cool. And then if you do level up the Hunter's Talent all the way so at the end of turn, you get to draw a card because you're already going to have a thing that's greater than 4 power. So it kind of helps fuel itself in a way, but again, just a way to get value out of an already good card. So in a pinch, this can kind of be a removal spell in addition to being all these other crazy things. And of course, I guess this is going to be a trend for the video. We're going to end each level on a bang. So let's just say you wanted to go as big as you could go copying a non-creature permanent. Well, hold that thought. There is a thing we can do that's way bigger than this, but this is pretty good. We'll talk about that thing toward the end of the video. But this doubling season is pretty insane, right? It's 5 mana, and anytime you would put counters on stuff, well, because of the name, it tells you you're putting double the number of counters on there. That means if you played an applied geometry that copies your doubling season, it says, hey, you get double the counters, which would be 12, but it also is a doubling season, which means you get double that, so you get 24 counters for 4 mana. That is a huge creature. I almost use some other language because it's huge. It's huge-mongous. Let's use that. That's clean enough, right? But yeah, like that alone is insane. And then now all your other stuff would get double twice. So like you can do some pretty silly things with this. I mean, doubling season being copied already shows you how insane it is. And that's not all that hard to do in reality. Okay, I have to put the brakes on here for a second. I just realized something. If you have doubling season and you copy it with the applied geometry, you get a fractal, but because the fractal is an actual token, you get a second fractal, which means they also see the doubling season, so you would actually end up with 2 fractals that have 48 counters on them. That's insane. All right, so as we move into level 3, we're going to talk about vehicles, because as it turns out, vehicles actually have some pretty strong abilities, but we kind of need to do something else to make them creatures. However, if you copy them, they just become creatures that happen to already have those abilities. So we're going to start with Hedge Shredder, right? This is a card that kind of underperformed from what lots of people expected it was going to do when it was previewed initially, but it actually is a 5/5, so I guess you'd get a 5/5 plus the counters, and like there's so much going on with this card. But more importantly, you get to attack and ramp up. So basically, you attack, you get to mill a couple of cards, and if there's any land, they just go onto the battlefield. So you can actually just keep growing your board while you're attacking with this really large creature. That also works alongside cards like Lumbering World Wagon, right? Which works even better because World Wagon only costs 3 mana, so you can actually play this onto the battlefield, search your land, go ahead and play your Applied Geometry, get your Fractal token the next turn. That's still a 6/6. It just happens to have all the text of the Lumbering World Wagon. But then you can also use it to crew the World Wagon and then attack and then go get another land. So you have a ton of mana going into that next turn while still having effectively 2 World Wagons in a way to get even more mana. So if you have anything that cares about landfall or anything like that, these cards could be right up your alley. Another fun card is Thunderous Velocipede. It's kind of gone under the radar for a long time, but you can have a 3 mana 5/5, again, if you were able to crew it. But it does have trample, which is a big deal because sometimes you can put all these counters on a creature and you just can't punch through. So now you can have an additional 4 mana creature with trample that whenever other things enter the battlefield, if they cost less than 4, they'll get 1 counter, but if they're bigger, they get 2 counters. Technically 3 counters, I guess, from this card. But I guess you would get 6 counters because you're getting 3 from the first Velocipede and 3 from your copied Velocipede. Yeah, this has us doing all kinds of math in this video, but you can see how these counters can stack up very quickly. But let's go a step further and decide just how silly can we really get. What if we copied an Extravagant Replication? Now, this is a 6 mana enchantment, so it is a little bit expensive. But at the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of another target non-land permanent you control. Now, you don't necessarily want to copy a thing that's just going to be a 0/0. However, you could spend your first copy to copy this original replication and then use that replication to copy something else. And then the next turn, you now use your original or your first copy. My goodness, this is hard to track. Your fractal copy to copy one of your replications, and now those two now copy something else, and so on down the line. Like, you can eventually just have infinite amounts of whatever the hell you want. Or even cards like Imposter Syndrome. There's a bunch of things that get to do stuff whenever they deal damage to the opponent or enter the battlefield, so you could then copy your Imposter Syndrome, then anytime something connected with your opponent, you get 2 copies of those things, which would be even crazier. There's a lot of situations where you could just attack in the game. I'm looking at you, Aurelia. Yeah, that card's kind of ridiculous if you connect multiple times. Just saying, that's a thing we can do now. As you can see, Applied Geometry allows you to do all kinds of stuff. And we've only touched on a few cards. They're literally, I don't know, I wouldn't say endless, but a ridiculous amount of things you're going to be able to do with this card. And we have, I don't know, like 16 sets legal and standard right now. So the options are out there. So don't be afraid to try some things. There's a lot of stuff you can do with this card. However, let me know in the comments if you thought of something really cool you can do with it that we didn't touch on here. That's all of you for now. We'll see you next time.